you said a few minutes ago, Vic, it is going to be the support of the sympathizers of these terrorists who cracked this case, and I don't think that's going to be easily forthcoming.
A little bit more than a half hour from now, President Bush will address the nation. The president's helicopter returns.
Now it's
just about dusk.
At first it was 7:30. I think he
I don't know what they're
Force
doing.
Base outside Omaha, Nebraska.
Man,
Mr. Bush conferred.
you always know how horrible our news media really is.
Vice President
when you
Dick
have
Cheney remained in the
a big
Situation
deal,
Room in a nearly
and they just
deserted
fucking they
White
fall
House
apart.
all through the day, coordinating government responses.
All they can do now is their canned bullshit.
Advisor Condoleezza Rice. As Bill indicated, Secretary of State Colin Powell just returned from a trip to South America. A trip cut short. Secretary Powell could get back to lead the diplomacy effort, a diplomatic effort around the world to apply pressure to find those who are responsible for today's terrorist attacks.
But for right now, the emphasis is on recovery, rescue, and police investigation. There is an enormous operation going on in New York around the World Trade Centers as they dig through 110 stories of rubble, hoping to find survivors of this tragedy. At the Pentagon, they are still looking through the burned out parts of the west side of the Pentagon for at least victims. Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld saying he does not expect survivors. This is continuing coverage from ABC News.
Live coverage from ABC News. I'm Stephen Tubbs.
I heard the plane very close to the top of the building. I looked outside and I saw it hit, and it exploded immediately.
Smoke is continuing to billow. It's getting black and blacker. Oh my God. It's spreading so fast. Debris is falling off the building as I speak. Gargantuan explosion. Oh my God, I don't believe it.
Brian Lutz there on the scene as we were talking.
Looking at it, the side, the northeast corner has exploded. People running down the street screaming, this huge dust cloud filling the sky.
It was just a small explosion, and then rocks and debris and everything started pouring down. Firefighters, everyone yelling, run, run, people running down the street.
Yes, I saw it. It just blew up. Big explosion. People started running. It was just chaos everywhere.
As soon as it got hit, I was thrown to a window. So I had very nothing to get out.
And on this very clear morning now, the unusual sight is the lack of the trade towers sticking up above the buildings that are normally here.
Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed into the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
Good evening again, everyone. I'm Stephen Tubbs. It's 8:01 in the east, 5:01 in the west, 6:01 in the Rockies, and 7:01 in the Midwest. As you've heard and no doubt are probably aware, an absolutely tragic, horrific day here in the United States. A day really words cannot accurately describe. Hijacked airliners, 2 of which crashed into the World Trade Center Twin Towers in New York City this morning. One hijacked jet crashing into the Pentagon. Another jet crashed near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. All flights were headed for California. No group, as of yet, has claimed responsibility into what will become the largest criminal investigation in history, and it's just barely getting underway. As rescuers poured into the southern tip of Manhattan, first one of the Twin Towers, then another came crashing down, 110 floors each. The buildings, of course, the trademarks of the New York City skyline. Of course, at this point, no indication as to the casualty count, how many hundreds or thousands are killed or injured. Now, stay with me here because what we're going to do, and it'll be a lot of talking, but just in case you haven't heard the timeline, I'll go over in Eastern Time what happened this morning, September 11th, 2001, a day that some say was just like Pearl Harbor, perhaps worse. About 8:45, according to the Associated Press, 8:45 a.m. Eastern Time, American Airlines Flight 11, carrying 92 people from Boston to Los Angeles, crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center at the southern tip of Manhattan in New York City. About 18 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175, carrying 65 people from Boston to L.A., crashed into the South Tower of the World Trade Center. The video that was captured boggles the mind, quite frankly. At 9:31 a.m. Eastern Time, President Bush calls these crashes an apparent terrorist act on the United States. At 9:40, trading on Wall Street was halted. At 9:43, American Airlines Flight 77, carrying 64 people from Washington to Los Angeles, crashes into the Pentagon. At 9:48, the Capitol and the West Wing of the White House evacuated. Keep in mind, at this time, President Bush not in Washington, D.C. He was in Sarasota, Florida, getting ready to address a group of students down in Florida. Actually, brief timeline and get picked up from there with Bob Schmidt, who is joining us live from the southern tip of Manhattan. Bob, why don't you pick up the timeline from there, where we have the two explosions from those jetliners going into the World Trade Center buildings.
The two explosions and then absolute panic and pandemonium stepping down here as people ran from the scene, tried to get out of the buildings and nearby buildings where the debris had fallen on them. And, of course, New York City firefighters and police and the rescue personnel making their way in toward where the planes had hit the buildings. And as they were setting up a triage center to take care of people who had come out, some of them badly burned, others just minor injuries. And as this area filled with this soot and this smoke and this debris, suddenly the Twin Towers, the 110-story Twin Towers, came down one after another. And that is really when the total disaster struck, because not only did you have the falling debris and the fire, you then
have an adequate number of burn centers, but not
for the ordinary burn cases that occur in everyday life, but not for the kinds of injuries and numbers that may come out of this.
And most middle-sized cities, which might be what we call the tri-state area, New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, have burn centers.
They have burn centers, but limited numbers of beds in most of those cities. We're going to have to talk about major cities, Boston, Chicago, cities in Canada, elsewhere, to take care of numbers that might well come out of this kind of a disaster.
And we're going to go to the triage center in a moment and talk to ABC's Cynthia McFadden, who's been there waiting like so many other people. Would explain to people again just basically what happens in triage. It's a question of selecting who to take care of and who to put aside.
Absolutely. You have limited resources by definition, and you have to decide who is most likely to benefit from those resources. Some you can put aside for later care. Others are so near death that any care is not possible, so you focus on the ones that need immediate emergency care and have a chance of survival.
And it must be one of the toughest decisions that a doctor ever has to make.
It is. I worked in an emergency room for 15 years, and that is among the toughest decisions, of course.
I believe, by the way, and this is particularly relevant to the New York audience, we won't necessarily find the phone number here, but when Mayor Giuliani and the police commissioner and the fire commissioner, the head of the FBI in New York, and the governor were all giving a news conference some time ago, the mayor said, we really don't feel any hate and anger being New Yorkers pulled together, and the governor had said, that we will, of course, get through this. He did point out that there was a true, genuine need for blood donors. And then I think we heard exactly the same thing from Attorney General Ashcroft, who said that anybody in the country who wanted to participate or felt they could give something, one of the things was to contact their local Red Cross center, because, as we know, there's a shortage of blood in the country. And the governor also said that they'd like it if doctors volunteered and nurses volunteered. There's a catastrophic shortage of nurses in the country, and the burden that will be on doctors and nurses here. The military, Tim and John, is pretty much, as I understand, they're getting civilian help at the Pentagon as well. The military pretty much is able to take care of its own under most circumstances, right?
It is, and the majority of injuries in the military, and I suspect the majority of injuries from this tragedy today will be crush injuries of various sorts. Again, burns are in a very special category, requiring very special kinds of care, and that's going to be a real issue.
We also know, and I think we actually can give you some sense of this already, that 3 ships of the U.S. Navy are on their way to New York, one of which, the USS Comfort,
there it is, see,
is a hospital ship with 1,100
makes
beds
the lines
on its way.
There's wheel spokes lines.
Services and the military.
See what I mean?
And the aircraft carrying the USS John F. Kennedy and the George Washington are coming as well, on their way from farther down the East Coast.
Man, I was thinking that earlier.
Put in New York Harbor, lest they are needed for a variety of reasons. And these aircraft carriers, particularly, and the Comfort, are hugely capable of taking care of casualties in a wide variety of ways. Hang on, Dr. Tim, we'll come back to you in just a second. I do want to go to Cynthia McFadden, who is at the triage center itself.
That commercial zone
Cynthia, do you hear me?
I do, Peter.
So just bring us up to date with what's happened there since we last checked.
Well, Peter, we're still standing by waiting. There are still hundreds of doctors and nurses here waiting. The grim realities are that they expect to tag hundreds, perhaps thousands of victims of this explosion throughout the night tonight. The reason the ambulances are still sitting empty at this point is because we understand from rescue workers they have not been able to get close enough to the actual midpoint of the explosion to actually bring anybody out, which is the reason that they are still standing by. They've told us the system here, Peter, I heard you talking about setting up a triage system. The system here will be as follows. Victims who come in and are tagged red are victims that they believe can be saved. Victims who are tagged yellow and green are walking wounded and will be quickly taken away to other locations. And then there are the black tags for those people who they feel they cannot help.
Thanks, Cynthia. We'll come back to you. I want to go quickly to Stoystown, Pennsylvania, at the moment where ABC's Dan Harris is standing by. 4 aircraft involved today. And we know that on each one of them there was a hijacking in process. And the aircraft that crashed near Johnstown, Pennsylvania, was United Flight 93 with 38 passengers and 7 crew on board. ABC's Dan Harris rushed to the scene of that accident, and I hope is with us now. Dan, do you hear me?
Peter, I do hear you. And we have a new piece of information on this crash from ABC's Lisa.
Full of EMS crews and ambulances. It appears they have got the lights up. The generators are working, and it's very possible they could be moving in soon for some kind of activity actually on the site. And I've got Don Daler here with me. We've been dividing up all the duties here, and he's been down to the scene. And also J.D. Halpern, who said he's just a volunteer who came in from California and was around the area. I just wanted to know, how much fire is there? You said you were just at ground zero. How much fire is left?
Well, the building 7, there was no fire there whatsoever, but there was one truck putting water on the building, but it's collapsed completely. And then the other building that there were some flames still coming up was in World Trade Center 1, but not a lot.
And you said you saw melted tour buses, melted cars?
The cars that were right down there, it was just unbelievable. They were twisted and melted into nothing. The debris is just unbelievable. And then you can see fire trucks and police vehicles that were down there early that all their windows, the windshields are completely blown out must have been from when debris dropped.
We can even see from here that the smoke seems to have gone down, Don. And I want to repeat, Peter, because JD was saying, as well as Don earlier, in case you didn't hear us, that it is carpeted up there. It is ankle deep in papers.
In some places, papers and debris go up 2 or 3 feet high. You have to wade through in some areas.
These are financial documents.
Yeah, the ones I looked at, many of them were financial documents, very personal documents that when I saw the first explosion that hit, there was just a snow cascade of paper, and the whole area down there is just coated with it.
Well, Peter, again, we'll let you know as soon as we can confirm that they are going in to the site. We should say that the mayor was here just a minute ago and drove by, waved at us, but would not stop. Back to you.
Diane, just exactly where are you?
We're about 4.5 blocks from ground zero.
Okay, thank you very much, Diane. Sorry, Don did a wonderful job for us earlier today, giving us some sense of what was happening as close as you could get to the scene. And I'm also joined now by ABC's George Stephanopoulos, who's been downtown all today. And so we'll have a chance to revisit that scene from a variety of locations after we hear from the president, because it's 8:30 Eastern Time, 3:30 in the West. And we are about to hear from the President of the United States. I think most of you know that the President has been on something of a strange journey today. He went off to Florida to promote education. He was in Florida when this occurred. He was then literally taken up by the security apparatus which surrounds him, and taken off first to Louisiana, where he touched down at an Air Force base. We didn't know what was going to happen. He was then taken off to Nebraska, to the old Strategic Air Command, one of the old Strategic Air Command bases from the Cold War days, put into a bunker or down the rabbit hole, as as it was described to us. ABC's Ann Compton was with him all day and talked all day about the struggle between the security and the political apparatus to whether the president can get back to Washington. Well, the president is back in Washington now, and there has been no time in his presidency, and there may never be a time like this again when it has been so important what he says to the country, because I think we all know at moments like this, the country looks to the President of the United States for understanding, for knitting the country together, and some presidents do it brilliantly, and some do not. Here is Mr.
Good
Bush.
thing we don't look to you, Peter. Fuck you.
Okay, this was the president isn't sitting there trying to think about what to say. I can assure you the president is sitting there because someone on network television has sat him down and said, we'll cue you in 30 seconds, Mr. Bush. And so as awkward as it looks to him, this is what we've expected him to do. And now here he is.
Good evening. Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack in a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes or in their offices. Secretaries, businessmen and women, military and federal workers, moms and dads, friends and neighbors. Thousands of lives were suddenly ended by evil, despicable acts of terror. The pictures of airplanes flying into buildings, fires burning, huge structures collapsing, have filled us with disbelief, terrible sadness, and a quiet, unyielding anger. These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat. But they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world.
Speaking there.
And no one will keep that light from shining. Today our nation saw evil, the very worst of human nature. And we responded with the best of America. With the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Immediately following the first attack, I implemented our government's emergency response plans. Our military is powerful, and it's prepared. Our emergency teams are working in New York City and Washington, D.C. to help with local rescue efforts. Our first priority is to get help to those who have been injured and to take every precaution to protect our citizens at home and around the world from further attacks. The functions of our government continue without interruption. Federal agencies in Washington, which had to be evacuated today, are reopening for essential personnel tonight and will be open for business tomorrow. Our financial institutions remain strong, and the American economy will be open for business as well. The search is underway for those who are behind these evil acts. I've directed the full resources of our intelligence and law enforcement communities to find those responsible and to bring them to justice. We will make no distinction between the terrorists who committed these acts and those who harbor them. I appreciate so very much the members of Congress who have joined me in strongly condemning these attacks. And on behalf of the American people, I thank the many world leaders who have called to offer their condolences and assistance. America and our friends and allies join with all those who want peace and security in the world. And we stand together to win the war against terrorism. Tonight I ask for your prayers for all those who grieve, for the children whose worlds have been shattered, for all whose sense of safety and security has been threatened. And I pray they will be comforted by a power greater than any of us, spoken through the ages in Psalm 23. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for you are with me. This is a day when all Americans from every walk of life unite in our resolve for justice and peace. America has stood down enemies before, and we will do so this time. None of us will ever forget this day. Yet we go forward to defend freedom and all that is good and just in our world. Thank you. Good night, and God bless America.
The President of the United States, when he is in many respects needed most. And we've been joined by George Stephanopoulos, who's been downtown all day and who very quickly picked up, George, that the President may have given us a hint in his first couple of lines there to the magnitude
I
of
make
this.
no distinction between those who harbored them and those who did.
By an official verifying the magnitude of the casualties. Thousands of lives suddenly ended. He also did a lot of other things in this very short speech, Peter. He gave voice to the anger that many Americans are feeling. He talked about the quiet, unyielding anger of America, and then was very pointed in giving reassurance. Military is prepared. The emergency teams are on their way. Government will be back to business tomorrow. Our economy will be back to business tomorrow. And then finally, Peter, what I found most interesting in the section about where he talked about retaliation, he said America would make no distinction between the terrorists and those who harbor them, which is a message to any state which may be supporting these terrorists who are behind this act.
Well, which creates a huge dilemma for the United States of America, because if it is discovered, as we've talked several times throughout the day, that a state, and I've forgotten who it was, a former director of the CIA perhaps earlier today, who said he couldn't believe that a state would actually support Jim Woolsey, former director of the CIA, who said directly he couldn't believe that a state would actively support an act such as this, though it may have over periods of time, as Iran and Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan have all been suspected to do, give collateral or indirect support down through the years.
The word that the president used was so expansive, Peter. It wasn't just supported or funded. It was any who harbored them, who may have given them sanctuary at any time. That is a very open-ended commitment.
And then I thought, by the way, also, if I may add, that this president particularly, who feels so strongly about his Christianity, felt it a good time to say, to quote those lines from Psalm 23, even though I walk, or yea, though I walk through the valley of death, I fear no evil, because God is with me. And that will just sit so appropriately, I believe, in the minds and the sentiments of many Americans tonight. And we felt throughout the day, we heard scattered reports of people going to churches and saying a prayer for those people who may or may not be lost, and for the families of those people around the country. Because don't forget, relatives in these locations have relatives all over the country. This is a total engagement with the nation. And I think you pretty much covered it all, except for one thing, George. The president talked also about the sense of safety and security of young people in America, particularly who were threatened today. And we heard that from people around the country today, people who simply could not believe, as it was the case at Oklahoma City, that this was happening in the United States. It's always something that happened somewhere else.
Or in the movies. And this is far worse than any plot that anyone could have ever devised. And I think I was downtown, as you mentioned today, Peter, so it was more surreal there, almost because people were so determined to get back to the normal life, even as the rest of all of downtown was being closed off. So it was a little cut off from what was happening around the country.
I hate this thing's driving me nuts.
And I think it's very characteristic of New York, and a bit of a characteristic of any other major community in the country, any other community as well. Terry Moran covers Mr. Bush for us today. But ironically, it wasn't with him today as he went on this education trip.
The atmosphere's freaking out because there's no jets flying around.
Regular location on the north lawn of the White House. Does that mean the White House has loosened up just a little bit?
Well, it has, Peter. The White House has leapt to life after several hours of the White House compound itself and the blocks around it in Washington essentially being deserted, a ghost town really coming in here. It is now a beehive of activity with government officials, cabinet secretaries. The president, of course, has returned. The First Lady has returned, and they are now working well into the night on this crisis. The president that you saw in these remarks, we are told, is the man who absorbed this tragedy today. He was described as steely throughout the day, as someone who did not react with great emotion or anger, who was able to see the pictures that America saw while he was in the air in Air Force One, and reacted very seriously, very soberly, pretty much as we saw him tonight.
Now, you say that the White House is up and running again, full in action, though the White House is really never completely out of action, no matter where it is. But what do you actually mean by that? What are they doing?
Well, what we are seeing right now is the president and his top advisors huddled in the Oval Office and in the study off the Oval Office. We saw cabinet secretaries and FEMA Director Joe Albaugh were here earlier, and Joe Albaugh is still here. He is briefing the president on the emergency response teams that he sent out. The president is receiving information from his national security advisor, Condoleezza Rice. You just see a great deal of activity, and you're right. This was not a completely deserted White House. Vice President Cheney was here, as was Dr. Rice, through the day. And in fact, we are told that the president, while he was in the air, had an open line of communication to the vice president throughout the day.
With all of our clients. We don't only want to give them the best deal possible, but we look forward to working with them in the future and with.
How difficult is it to respond to a faction?
Work nowhere near the southern tip of Manhattan where all this carnage took place, had an ordeal just getting home to worried family members.
You can see my house from here. If I could swim, I'd be there already.
In a chunk of the city where millions come to work each day, there were no trains, subways, or buses for a time to get them all out. In most cases, people walked and walked and walked. In the early afternoon, these folks were begging for a ride just across the just-opened George Washington Bridge.
Look at this.
The trip home for most took hours and hours. With Manhattan shut to all but emergency vehicles, the city was virtually empty. When there were people, they were packed around television and radios with the latest update. New Yorkers were clearly stunned, and in some cases, enraged. This man says of his reactions today.
First was fear. It was like, wow, it actually happened. Second is pure rage. I just can't believe they did it. This is like Pearl Harbor.
And while many felt helplessness, others took action. Thousands crowded New York community centers to donate blood.
Everybody wants to feel like they can do something, and even if it's something small, and giving a little bit of blood is the least anyone can do. So
Gabriel Roth among those who waited 5 hours to give blood. So many people that
we are no longer taking any donations.
The New York Blood Center had to ask people to come back in the morning. It was a day that many felt possible, but most thought they'd never see. In the words of this man, it was
it's a horrible day. Probably the worst day in the history of the city, in the history of this country. So
one of the only things that did turn New Yorkers' heads today and did make some of us feel a bit better was the sound of military jets overhead to make sure it didn't get any worse. And Steph, I mentioned a while ago that my dad worked near one of those buildings many years ago before he retired, and as a new father yourself, you know, you're aware of the family matters in situations like this. We live in a town maybe 30 miles north of New York City, and on a berm, on a clear day, we can go there in the family car and look out and see the World Trade Center. We can't anymore, Steph.
Tim, it's absolutely amazing to think of what's happened today and to try to put it all into context. I think anybody listening to this right now, you can just try to imagine and you tell yourself, yes, this has happened, and yes, I comprehend this, and this was a horrible tragedy, and we'll never forget this day. This is one of those times where I think it's going to be a day, a week, a month. Certainly we'll be celebrating, unfortunately, or marking, I should say is a better word, the anniversary of September 11th for years to come. I don't think it's fully set in for the people around the country, and that may be, Tim, the understatement of the day.
Oh, I totally agree. Even people walking around this newsroom who have been living, you know, eating this whole story all day long, you know, working without any rest, without any focus on anything else. It's almost like it's a movie, and we're sitting back talking about something that we just saw on a television screen. Stefan, for those who live and work in this city, to to drive along the highway and look out from the George Washington Bridge and to see a void where two buildings stood, and to know that there were tens of thousands of people who worked in that building and who may have been in there at the time, that is going to be a pain that is going to keep this city numb for days, weeks, months.
Tim, briefly before we let you go for the time being, I know you live in New Jersey and were, as a newsman, trying to get into Manhattan, and it must have been just chaotic to try to get in. It took quite a long time. Tell us briefly about how it was for you to finally actually get to work.
Well, Steph, the city police actually shut down all the arteries going into New York. That means the George Washington Bridge, the Lincoln Tunnel, the Holland Tunnel from Jersey, the Long Island Expressway, many of the Lower East River bridges from Brooklyn and Queens, the 59th Street Bridge. They literally did not let any vehicle into Manhattan, and might still not be allowing any vehicles in. So people would go to all kinds of routes to try and get in on a local street. It could not happen. Eventually, what I had to do was get my wife to deliver a
cloak, whether it is a civilian aircraft or schools or children or women, and the need for all of us to join behind the president.
There's
the
no
war
rules
against
of warfare
terrorism,
anymore.
particularly for those responsible, and you pointed out very rightly, those who harbor and aid and abet them. The international community has to isolate them, has to make a determined effort against them, or else this cancer will continue to grow.
Malcolm, as you well know, a lot of people have likened this to Pearl Harbor. I'm wondering, are you one of those that liken this, or is this so different? It was not in quote-unquote wartime. Is this the same, or is this just something, as I was stating earlier, that obviously maybe we've never seen?
Well, I think that it's, in a sense, worse in the sense
to your left.
reflects the shock and the impact that Pearl Harbor had when people saw the devastation that was wrought while the Japanese were negotiating here. They carried out the attack. Here you have such a
is that the gambling deal, I guess?
Yeah, not in this time of war. It was targeted against civilians. It was targeted against symbols, buildings. It was targeted to create horror and shock, and they haven't even yet claimed credit for it. They haven't even stood up to say who is responsible for it. So I think that there are historical analogies that one can draw, but I think that in some senses this is even worse.
You know, just a couple quick more questions, Malcolm. I'm wondering, you touched on the historical aspect. You certainly know the history in the Middle East, and I'm wondering, at this point, we're now more than 12 hours, let's almost call it 13 hours since this happened. I'm wondering, in your dealings and your expertise, is this unusual that it has taken now 13 hours for anyone credible, a credible organization, to claim responsibility?
Well, of late, there's been a pattern that these terrorist organizations have not claimed credit in about half of the cases. There are some organizations like the Popular Front for Liberation of Palestine which took credit, but the fact is that they're probably not capable of doing this. Osama bin Laden is probably one of the few who has the network, the capability, the resources, and the likelihood is that there was some sort of a state backing and funding to carry out this kind of a coordinated and complex effort. It is very disturbing to see the pictures in Nablus and other places of Palestinians demonstrating support and dancing and celebrating this horrible effort. I spoke to the foreign minister, and to the prime minister today. They had put Israel's team of rescue and evacuation team that went to when the American embassy was bombed in Kenya and other cases are mobilized and are waiting, in fact, at the airport to find a landing here in the United States when the airports are open and are going to come here. But it's a reminder that we shouldn't think that this is a danger that faces Israel or other parts of the world, but is here at home as well. And it's going to take steps to protect our borders from both sides. It means that there will be restrictions. We will have to put up and try to devise new means. And that they shouldn't be condemned as being restrictive or anti-democratic. We have a responsibility to maintain our freedom and our way of life, that we have to act to restrict access to our country, to see to it that many of those who are entering it, or the ability to bring in chemical, biological, and other weapons, which is what many anticipated would be the kind of massive attack we would see next.
We are talking with Malcolm Holine. He's the chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. We are standing by just to let you know We're standing by to hear from New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, who called the death toll would probably be, I think his words were, horrific. And Malcolm, what do you think this does to the peace process in the Middle East?
I think that the scope and the nature of this is going to raise further questions at a time when we've seen violence now for more than a year, with thousands of attacks, with heavy toll, and the seeming unwillingness or inability of the Palestinian Authority to act against it and to sustain it. That people will now look at this, I think, anew and see the true scope and the willingness of these groups to engage and to expand their activities, that it's got to have a negative impact and raise further down.
Malcolm, thank you for your time this evening. Malcolm Holine, chairman of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations. We appreciate your take on this, and thanks for your time. It's coming up on 44 minutes past the hour, 6:44 on the West Coast and 9:44 on the East, and now we're coming up about 13 hours since this happened. The first flight went into the World Trade Center about 8:48 this morning Eastern time, and one flight that was hijacked went into the Pentagon, and that's where we go now to Washington, D.C. ABC's Bill Greenwood. Bill?
Thank you very much, Stephen. Beyond the death and destruction of this tragedy, there are some serious economic considerations that are drawing the attention tonight of both officials of the Treasury Department's Office of Economic Advisors. There is concern about possible panic selling on the U.S. stock markets and commodity markets, and for that reason, and also the fact that the New York Stock Exchange is in the area of devastation, stock markets and commodity markets in this country will be closed tomorrow. There has already been some evidence of the concern that U.S. Financial officials have. It is now daytime Wednesday in Tokyo, and stocks on the Tokyo exchanges have plunged to their lowest levels in 17 years. The dollar is down sharply against the yen in Tokyo, and officials here are just crossing their fingers to see what will happen to American investors once stock markets are open. Here in Washington, Stephen, there is increasing criticism over the lack of intelligence about the possibility of this attack.
Yeah, isn't that wild?
Members of the United States Congress and Senate briefed. There are indications
just kind of
that there
turns
have
to
been some intercepts
super posturization
suggesting a finger that might point to Osama bin Laden, the #1 international terrorist. The United States spends about $30 billion a year on intelligence gathering, and numerous specialists are calling this a colossal failure. There is already
talk
about
relying too much on satellites and high-tech bullshit when we need warm bodies in the field.
Put on the Intelligence Committee, even to the point of some lawmakers saying maybe we need to rethink our ban on political assassinations. This is all the knee-jerk reaction in a city that is like yours in Los Angeles and like in New York, absolutely stunned by what has happened in these two major United States cities. I should tell people that there will be no mail service in the United States tomorrow for people who live more than 600 miles away from where they mailed their letters. Processing centers will just hold on to them because there can be no airline mail service. The airlines will not open until at least 12:30 tomorrow afternoon, if then. There have been tens of thousands of people stranded in airports, both here in the United States and throughout the world. U.S.-bound flights, after the airports in our country were closed, were diverted to Canada and to Bermuda. Britain and Belgium banned flights over their capitals. There were disruptions to airline flights out of Tokyo, the Middle East, you name it. There are 500 international flights every day into the United States with 400 passengers on each flight by average. So that means that today alone, 200,000 international travelers have not been able to get to the United States. Stephen?
And Bill Greenwood, we had talked earlier today, obviously Los Angeles International Airport, one of the busiest in the world. 2,100 flights coming here to Los Angeles every day, and obviously those flights didn't come anywhere else around the country either. People in San Francisco, at San Francisco International, as well as here in Los Angeles at LAX, stating that there has never been a time, and that's stating the obvious, there's never been a time that the airport was completely closed down for any length of time and completely empty. And Bill, I'm sure you saw that at Dulles and National Airport as well. The people that were not essential airport personnel, they were asked to leave and actually escorted out of there.
And at Dulles Airport, Stefan, there was an immediate deployment of FBI agents. The airport was sealed off. Police were literally walking around the lobby with guns drawn because they wanted to find anyone who knew anything about the terrorists who boarded one of the planes at Washington's Dulles Airport. And a similar situation has occurred at Logan Airport in Boston and Newark Airport in New York. The FBI has sent a small army of investigators to every place that there might be a clue. There are over 1,000 agents deployed in New York City, and more are coming in even as we speak from field offices throughout the United States. The entire U.S. intelligence community has finally been revved up. They're using every asset they can think of to try and get some clues as to who might be involved, and that includes the super secret National Security Agency. They intercept tens of thousands of international telephone calls and wireless communications. Now their supercomputers are going through all of those tapes, trying to find any evidence, any conversations that would tell them who did this. Stephan?
ABC's Bill Greenwood live in Washington. We will certainly check in with you as the evening progresses. Let's get the latest on the investigation into the tragedy today, September 11, 2001. Here's ABC's Paul James. And apparently we're having some trouble with that. We apologize. We can again recap this happening a little more than now, almost 13 hours ago. And as we continue to talk about what Bill Greenwood was discussing with me just a few seconds ago about airports, I can tell you from the West Coast perspective, we gave you a laundry list earlier, and it's probably worth going through again quickly. Here in California, where I am, in the Los Angeles Bureau for ABC News, Disneyland, amusement parks were closed. In San Francisco, the Golden Gate Bridge on high security alert all day, as the Bay Bridge was that connects Oakland and San Francisco. The famous Transamerica Tower closed today. Skyscrapers here in Los Angeles were evacuated. It was early, obviously, when this happened on the East Coast, when they were evacuating the West Coast skyscrapers. The Library Tower here in downtown Los Angeles, for example, is the tallest building west of the Mississippi at more than 1,000 feet, and certainly a target potentially for possible terrorist activity. In Nevada, high-profile casino attractions were closed down. The Hoover Dam closed, and up in Seattle, the world-famous Space Needle closed there as well. We'll go back to talking about the Washington, D.C. area now with our colleague ABC's Barbara Vitt. She joins us on the phone from Maryland. And Barbara, I imagine it's still chaotic there, but what an incredible day.
Stephan, a very unusual sight in downtown Washington. There are military Humvees at the end of each block, complete with MPs who are wearing camouflage and orange vests. And they are certainly keeping an eye on the streets, which are otherwise, Stephan, very quiet.
Barbara, what's it been like, I guess, overall through the day? Have the streets been empty in Washington? Have people been out? Did they try to get out of D.C. and maybe to the suburbs? How has that been?
Unbury his guitar.
Early on,
no, we don't need.
We're gonna take that step straight.
Oh, yeah, that's right, because they're going to be down on the 16th.
Of the attack, the streets were in a mass exodus. Lots of folks, as they were in New York, walking on the street. Lots of gridlock within the city blocks as folks tried to head home. People getting out of cabs and just walking. But obviously by this time of night, the city is quieter than normal. Stephanie, even some bars and restaurants in Georgetown, which is a hot spot, are closed for business completely. It's dark.
Right, Barbara, we heard from ABC's Jim Hickey in Midtown Manhattan earlier tonight, and he had said that they have last call at 6:30 this evening in New York because
dang it, I'm telling you.
I think the bartender's words
Christy
were no one was
is just,
really quite in a
she can't fit, you put a camera on her.
Barbara, real
she looks
quickly,
great, no matter what.
President Bush in his remarks tonight to the nation
It does, man, I tell you, the camera is being good to Christy.
You know as well as I do, he needs to say that to be presidential, but in your estimation, how realistic is that?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what the call is in the morning from the Office of Personnel Management.
Killer Infinite Magic Switch.
Whether federal workers go in or not. They also have an option for what we always call liberal leave, where the worker can decide if they wanted to take a leave day and stay home. And that may be the recommendation. We know that here in Maryland now they have stop there for dinner.
All right. We've got bike rack here. It doubles as a bike rack. Or a luggage rack in the back of that car. Or a window phone. Or a fireplace grate, a very large fireplace. It'll be ease. If you ever lose your ease, you know where they are. I've got a stack of them. Whoa. Alright, if not, no problem. Yeah, Chris, we'll see you soon. Hey, see you, mate.
Take care. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was, man.
Hey, we'll see you down at all right.
So much.
Probably be down there Saturday.
So good. Good to travel. We gotta get autographs from all you guys too.
Tomorrow. Okay. Give us a kiss. We'd like t-shirts. Oh. It was fun, man. You guys are
down? Saturday.
Yeah. I hope so.
Good times.
I hated that like this, man. We'll do it again. Who? Hey, Mark. See you, brother. All right. We'll work tomorrow. I will. Yeah. Are you going to work tomorrow? You gonna no, I'm like that. I'm just sleeping late. Yeah, I'm showing on class. Made it all the way. We'll do it again. Oh, yeah. Want me to hold the camera while you get the Christie hug?
Is it going?
Yeah, it's
okay.
rolling.
Dudley wants to
Christie. Dudley. See you next time. Good game.
Good game.
Good game.
There we go.
Get him next year, all right?
Rock and roll summer camp.
There we go.
See you, mister. We're going to close. Don't forget about the fall session. See you next summer. See you next summer, yeah. We're going to do a fall and winter session, I think.
Yeah.
See you back in Springfield. Oh, shoot. Rock and roll summer camp. Hello, mother. Hello, father. Oh, you hard bar. I blew a fuse in Camp Grenada. The marshal was great, man. Okay. All right. Oh, good. Yeah. Okay.
We're going to have the police and it's going to spring Alatius.
Just be careful. This is a time in which we all have to cooperate.
Is this Rudy?
Help each other. Yeah. Alternate side street parking is suspended.
Alternate side.
Sanitation services will take place in most of the city, except obviously in the lower part of Manhattan, where the sanitation department will be working.
There's a one-way. What's he doing coming down the
debris,
street?
which has already started. And the schools again will be closed tomorrow.
and hopefully we'll get them open as soon as possible. Tomorrow the effort will be at trying to recover as many people as possible and trying to clean up the horrible mess that was created by all this. And I would ask people to cooperate as much as possible in that effort. If you have to come into Manhattan because your business is essential, then obviously do it. The upper part of Manhattan will be open. But if tomorrow is a day in which you want to stay home and stay with your family and
is that line for the gas station there?
Affected by this, it would be a good day to do it.
That might be the line for that.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah,
Buck 55.
The point that Richie Sure makes is people are wonderful, and I mean this in the best sense of the word. We've had thousands and thousands of people that have come to help us.
Who is responsible for starting that room?
Site near the World Trade Center, I met
Who's responsible for starting what room?
$5 a gallon in St. Louis.
Yeah. People that the governor has sent.
$4 in Kansas City. Who's the fuck started that?
We have enough volunteers now. We have more volunteers, frankly.
They might have got a couple of bomb threats.
And what we need to do is to focus the efforts of the professionals over there in being able to do the recovery.
Once we get out of town, is that when we're going to stop for some grubbity grub?
Restore services as quickly as possible. We may be asking for more volunteers tomorrow and the next day and the day after. But right now we don't need
Mexican.
any
Oh,
more
are we
volunteers.
going?
We're not really going to sit
I wish.
Huh? We're not really going to sit down and eat, are we?
Yes,
Get out of the fucking van for a
I
minute.
hope that there are people that are still alive.
How is the rescue effort hampered by the storm?
What's his neighborhood called in Kansas City?
Westport.
We moved the Monterites.
Yeah, this is the radio station right here.
So that the area
Lurleen.
is lit now. So that I don't think the rescue effort is going to be.
Oh yeah, we were here.
The rescue effort is hampered by the fact that there's still.
Looks kind of different.
There's still unsound structures, and it's still dangerous.
News depend on WDAF News Radio in 61 countries.
That night, everyone has parties.
Ladies and gentlemen, the following special report has been brought to you by 61 Country. We will continue to follow the situation and keep you updated throughout the evening and early morning hours. WDAF Kansas City is 61 Country.
This evening, it's going to be one of those nights when you put your head on your pillow and you'll do one of two things. You will hope to wake up tomorrow and this will all be a really bad dream. Or you will thank and
Fade that music down.
for what you have today and who you have in your life.
Just Maine? What is it?
Oh, I meant the DJ.
Is this where the hurricane is? Oh, no, we're not. This looks like, I think it's on it. I think it's
Hurricane
right in there, but I guess not. No. CR.
Yeah, if you put it on FM, try that NPR. That we're listening to that. It was pretty good.
Patients to continue looking through the rubble for victims. A truck pulled a heavy crane up near the western wall, and fresh teams of rescue crews arrived, bringing dogs along with them. Early in the evening, reporters were allowed into the building. Though the hall smelled of smoke and a haze hung in the air, top military officials remained on the job. And as he waited for orders to act, General Hugh Sheldon told reporters, "Your armed forces are ready." Steve Inskeep, NPR News, the Pentagon.
Officials have been reluctant to estimate the number of dead and injured, but in New York, a vice president with the New York City Firefighters Union now says as many as 200 firefighters who first reached the scene may be dead. Mike Carter says we have entire companies that are just missing. He said we're going to have to bury a lot of people. You're listening to NPR News. Again, no credible estimates on the number of people killed or injured, but we do know something about the number of people on the airliners involved. American Airlines says two of its planes, both hijacked, crashed with a total of 156 people. Two United Airliners with a total of 110 aboard also crashed. Altogether, the planes had 266 people aboard. In the face of the attacks, hundreds of New Yorkers are lining up to donate blood at local hospitals. Letitia Theodore of member station WNYC reports.
New York Beth Israel Medical Centers began turning away potential donors, saying they are handling the maximum number of people they can. Further uptown at the Cabrini Medical Center, they're opening a second unit to accommodate the long lines of people willing to donate. One man was upset when he was turned away because he was gay. Another woman remembered the warnings given by the New York Blood Center that a shortage of blood would be imminent if the city ever faced a disaster. For NPR News, I'm Letitia Theodore in New York.
Today's attacks led drivers in various parts of the country to line up for an hour or more to buy gasoline, costing as much as $5 a gallon. Panic caused by rumors of pending gasoline shortage sent prices skyrocketing in Oklahoma, Mississippi, Michigan, and other states. In California, gasoline wholesalers raised prices by as much as 20 cents a gallon on supply fears. Tokyo stocks plunged below the key 10,000 point mark today as traders dumped shares in reaction to the attacks. The dollar was sharply lower against the yen.
The trend didn't really
Tokyo
take
market's opening was delayed by
all
half
it
an
did
hour.
was
New
cause
York
a bunch
Stock
of people
Exchange, American
to buy
Stock
a whole lot of
Exchange,
gas
and
they
the
wouldn't buy
NASDAQ announced that they would stay closed through tomorrow. I'm Frank Stasio, National Public Radio News in Washington.
They get a couple of those wholesalers and lock them up. My God, they'd drop that
It's
price.
not the wholesalers, is it? It's the retailers.
No, it's all of them.
Retailers.
The wholesale. They just got through saying the wholesalers are going to raise the price.
This is a special report from NPR News.
Not
I'm
$2.50.
Just about
That's what happens when they raise it. That means retail is going to go by a multiple of that amount.
Sky over New York City and smashed into the World Trade Center. Fire and smoke billowed out of the famous skyscraper.
That's where free enterprise and capitalism is.
There's a great deal we do not know
got some
about
glaring.
today, who did it and why, but we can already
It's
mark
not the
this
World
Tuesday
Trade Center. It's
one of the worst days in American history. As NPR News continues special live coverage, we'll be speaking with NPR senior news analyst Daniel Shore and bring you news updates and a report from the streets of New York. We'll also be taking your phone calls
Bite this guy too.
on what changed in America today, what's different after the terrorists attacked. Our telephone number is 800-989-8255. That's 800-989-TALK. First, though, President Bush spoke to the nation from the Oval Office about an hour and a half ago. He was in Florida when the news broke this morning and was flown first to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, then to Offutt Air Force Base, the old Strategic Air Command headquarters in Omaha, Nebraska, before he returned to Washington. Here's his speech in full.
Today, our fellow citizens, our way of life, our very freedom came under attack.
Here we go, Rongo.
In a series of deliberate and deadly terrorist acts. The victims were in airplanes.
I heard a roar and I looked around thinking that it had to be a helicopter, and I looked up and I saw the second plane hit.
A second commercial plane, a United Airlines jet, also hijacked, carrying 65 people, plows into the South Tower.
First one we thought was an accident. When we heard there was a second one, we definitely thought it was terrorism.
On the ground, witnesses could not believe their eyes. 70 stories up with the building burning, reason gave way to desperation. New York's bravest never had a chance.
We really never even got to that close to the building. The explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
Less than an hour later, the South Tower came crumbling down.
It collapsed. The top floors collapsed down. I saw it blow and then ran like hell. Thank God. I'm 69, but I can still run.
But it was far from over.
Now, Tower 2 collapsed into Tower 1. Within minutes after that, we were ordered out.
When the dust settled, signs of life started to emerge.
Chaos. There's chaos out here, it really is. So the Twin Towers fall. It's amazing. It's crazy. I can't believe this shit is happening. I really can't. It's nightmares. Armageddon right here.
This was the worst act of terrorism on U.S. soil, but not the first attack on the World Trade Center. 8 years ago, terrorists set off bombs in the basement in an effort to take down the two towers. They failed. Today, mission accomplished.
I tell you what, it's a sad day for America. It really is.
By 2 o'clock this afternoon, firefighters and police officers and paramedics by the hundreds stood by, many of them feeling helpless. There was nothing they could do at this point because the building was still unsecured.
Our main priority is to get in, do a search and rescue, look for survivors, and then clean up what's left. And we can't do that until the building is deemed safe.
Ankle deep in debris and despair, rescue workers waited. Some had relatives of their own inside. One police officer told me her sister worked here on the 40th floor, due in at 9 a.m. She was always early, she said. Always. A sign on a paramedic's van spoke volumes.
We know we have some of the major brass of our department missing. We're trying to find them, too.
New York Port Authority Police Chief William Hall choked back tears. For him, this was no longer just work.
On a personal level, because I know that these are all your men and it's a business, but I'm sure that all these guys are your friends. How you holding up?
Business now, it's personal now.
Sir?
It's personal now. We have to get them.
Back live here in Lower Manhattan, New York City's mayor announced a few minutes ago that 6 people have died in area hospitals. The New York City Policemen's Union says 87 police officers are missing. The New York City Fire Union says that 200 firefighters are dead. All of them in harm's way when the second tower collapsed this morning. At this hour, several buildings are still on fire behind me, about 3 blocks behind me over my shoulder. Rescue workers by the hundreds, policemen, firefighters, doctors, paramedics are all waiting, dressed, ready to go inside the building when the word comes. Dan, a short time ago, we felt a cool breeze here off the Hudson River.